It does not begin with an explosion. It begins with a sound. A deep, distant rumble, felt more in the chest than in the ears. Not loud, not close. The veterans react instantly. They drop to the ground, pressing their bodies into the dirt as if they could crawl into it. The new men hesitate, just for a moment. Then the world tears apart. The air bursts open. The ground jumps. Metal cuts through space and time. Some men die instantly. Others are thrown aside like tools, and some simply collapse without a visible wound. Their lungs are torn, their organs crushed by pressure alone. What they experience in that moment is not a firefight. It is the true horror of the Second World War. And it did not come from a rifle. Artillery. When the Second World War begins, many believe they have already understood artillery warfare. Verdun is still in living memory. The Somme, the endless firestorms of the First World War. This time, they believe, everything will be different. The war is mobile, fast, mechanized. Tanks break through front lines. Aircraft dominate the skies. Speed is supposed to be protection. In this image, artillery seems like a relic. Important, but only in support. That is a dangerous illusion. Because in the Second World War, artillery did not become less important, but more. More flexible, more concentrated, more systematic. Fire plans are drawn up behind the lines. Grid squares are occupied as if they were empty. Battery after battery is aligned. Distances are measured, targets pre-registered. Not because the enemy is always seen, but because commanders have learned that you do not need to see him to destroy him. Industry supplies the front without pause. Trains run day and night. Ammunition columns feed a system that is never satisfied. But this industrial logic had a side effect that never appeared on any planning map. The more reliable the supply became, the more uninhibited the use of fire grew. Fire was no longer requested only when it seemed necessary, but increasingly because it was possible. Officers planned artillery strikes in advance, without knowing who would later be inside those zones. Fire plans were drawn up days ahead of time. Grids were fixed before the enemy was even there, or perhaps never would be. Artillery became an instrument of anticipation. Spaces were shelled to destroy possibilities. Fire was laid to prevent movements that had not even begun. This way of fighting shifted responsibility. The observer reported coordinates. The fire direction center calculated distances. The battery fired. None of them saw the target, none of them saw the result. Between decision and death lay calculations. The more perfect the system became, the more abstract death became. And the more abstract death became, the easier it was to call for fire. So a cycle emerged of technology and distance, in which artillery was no longer just a weapon, but a way of thinking. If something is possible, it will be done. Artillery becomes the logic of war. Distance replaces certainty, and numbers replace faces. And where this logic first reveals its full force, the rumble begins. In Stalingrad. In Stalingrad, the artillery war does not begin with an attack. It begins with a condition. Thousands of guns open fire at once, not for minutes, for hours. The sky flickers without pause. The ground ceases to be solid. Entire city blocks are turned to dust before infantry even moves forward. Buildings collapse. Streets disappear. Orientation becomes impossible. But the horror is not only the destruction, it is the density. Fire is laid like a carpet. A strip of land becomes a place where nothing is normal anymore. No sounds, no colors, no contours. Even where tanks clash, like at Kursk, artillery works like a second invisible army. Firestorms rip open minefields, shred forests, bury trenches. Rocket launchers howl in salvos. Shells do not have to hit to kill. The pressure alone is enough. Men die in cover, outwardly unmarked. Inside, everything is destroyed. Artillery reshapes space faster than humans can read it. A place that offered shelter moments ago is suddenly exposed. Maps lose their meaning. Orientation becomes guesswork. This kind of fire does not only change the terrain, it changes how units move through it. Infantry no longer advances to take ground. It advances to pass through zones that were under fire moments earlier. The ground is still warm. The smoke still hangs in the air. And no one knows whether unexploded shells still lie buried beneath the soil. Tanks drive through landscapes that are no longer landscapes, crater after crater. Shattered trees, torn open earth. The terrain offers no orientation anymore, only resistance. Artillery forces the war into a rhythm of destruction and exploitation. First the fire, then the movement, then fire again. But this rhythm is unstable. A delayed round can strike your own advance. A misdrawn grid can place friendly troops inside the fire zone. So a paradox emerges. The more artillery is meant to control space, the more uncontrollable that space becomes for everyone involved. The war turns into a sequence of fire-created wastelands that no one truly controls, only enters. The war becomes unpredictable for both sides. For the men on the ground, artillery is not support. It is a condition. They do not wait for orders. They wait for the next rumble. Time begins to warp, seconds stretch. Minutes lose their meaning. Conversations grow quieter, then rarer. Then they stop altogether. Bodies react before thoughts form. The jaw clenches, the shoulders stay raised. Hands return again and again to the same grip. Some develop rituals. They lay out their gear in the same order every time, not because it helps, but because it simulates control. Others lose even that. They sit motionless, no longer responding, eyes open, the person behind them unreachable. The worst part is not the explosion. It is the waiting without a time, waiting without information, waiting without influence. At some point, chance no longer feels like bad luck, but like a rule. This state does not end with the barrage. It continues afterward. Many soldiers later reported that their bodies kept reacting long after the shelling ended, as if the fire was still going on. A distant rumble was enough to tense muscles, flatten breath, interrupt thought. Sleep became restless. They woke without knowing why. The body had learned that calm was only an interval. Some men began to misread sounds. A falling helmet sounded like an impact. A truck engine like another barrage rolling in. The nervous system remained on alert, even when there was nothing left to detect. In this permanent state, fear lost its character as an exception. It became background noise, not loud, not dramatic, but constant. This is how artillery worked beyond the moment of impact, not only as physical violence, but as something that permanently reset the inner rhythm of a person. The horror of artillery does not stay at the front. It reaches the cities. In Leningrad, shells strike residential blocks, hospitals, lines of people waiting for bread. People die not only from direct hits, but from the fear of even leaving their homes. At Monte Cassino, a centuries-old monastery is reduced to rubble, not because anyone is certain the enemy is there, but because it cannot be ruled out. In the final months of the war, entire districts are turned into fields of rubble. Berlin, Warsaw, Königsberg, streets become canyons, basements become traps. Death comes through walls, through ceilings, through floors. There is no safe rear area anymore. The city itself becomes the front. For the people beneath it, there is no front line, only impacts. When the fire ends, a silence remains that feels wrong. Too empty, too sudden. The ground is covered in craters, metal juts from the earth. Many shells did not explode. They lie there, waiting. Decades later, they still kill. Construction workers, farmers, children. The Second World War ends in 1945, but its artillery does not disappear. The true horror of this weapon was never only its destructive power. It was that you could do everything right and still die without ever seeing the enemy.